Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are looking at a moment in history that wasn't just, revolutionary. It was, I think, profoundly shocking to the entire world order.
It really was.
We're talking about the Haitian Revolution from 1791 to 1804. And our goal here isn't just to go over the dates and battles, is to understand how this single event basically exposed the entire ideological scam of the so-called Age of Enlightenment.
I think you've hit on it exactly. It is, without a doubt, arguably the most signal and transformative event in the entire age of revolution. And the reason for that is, well, it's simple and it's stark.
Right.
It is the only instance in all of modern history where an organized revolt by enslaved people successfully led to the founding of a free, independent, black-led state.
The only one.
The only one. And that success, that very fact, fundamentally challenged what we call North Atlantic hegemony. Yeah. It forced the world to reckon with the massive moral dissonance of, preaching liberty while practicing the most brutal forms of slavery.
And what an unbelievably brutal fight it was. So our mission today for you is to unpack the source material and really get at the origins of this independence movement. We have to start with the colonial hellscape of Saint-Domingue.
We do.
Then we'll detail the brutal path to achieving freedom, the complexities of forging a whole new national identity in the middle of all this chaos, and, crucially, the lasting historiographical debates.
Yeah.
The ones that, often failed to properly place this epic struggle where it belongs in world history.
And we absolutely have to give a special acknowledgement here. A lot of the framework for this deep dive, for navigating this incredibly dense history, comes from the fantastic resources curated by Russell Tarr at activehistory.co.uk. His work has been just invaluable in structuring this.
Absolutely.
Because this deep dive is so necessary, Haiti proved that the universal ideals of the French and American revolutions, freedom, equality, rights, they were only ever meant to be selectively applied. The people of Saint-Domingue had to conquer those rights for themselves.
So let's unpack that first point, the ideological paradox. How could an age so obsessed with philosophy, with reason, with natural rights, the very ideas fueling revolutions in Paris and Philadelphia, how could it simultaneously oversee and profit from the most brutal system of human bondage in history?
That is the core conflict, isn't it? When France declared the rights of man and of the citizen, it created this intellectual and political vacuum in its colonies.
Because the words were out there, but no one knew who they applied to.
Exactly. The French government, it simply wasn't prepared for the possibility that those rights might apply to 450,000 enslaved Africans. So Haiti, or Saint-Domingue, became the laboratory where the failure of the Enlightenment to live up to its own principles was just, violently exposed.
Okay, so to understand the explosion, you have to understand the pressure cooker that was Saint-Domingue. This wasn't some minor, struggling colony. This was the Pearl of the Antilles. Take us through the sheer, staggering wealth of this place.
The economic output was, it was completely unparalleled. By the late 1780s, this one tiny French colony was supplying 40% of all the sugar.
40%.
And 60% of all the coffee consumed in Europe. To put that into perspective, the total value of its exports was almost equal to the value of all exports shipped from all 13 colonies combined to Great Britain.
It's just, that's an incredible statistic.
It was the absolute jewel in the French crown. And this incredible wealth, it drove an economy that was completely 100% dependent on extreme exploitation.
And that engine of wealth, sugar, primarily required what historians describe as just relentless, backbreaking manual labor. This wasn't just difficult work, was it? It was a calculated, institutionalized system of murder aimed at maximizing profit.
That's exactly what it was. The process of harvesting sugarcane, refining it, running the mills, it demanded continuous, exhausting labor 24 hours a day during the harvest season. Nonstop. And when you combine those working conditions with, tropical diseases like yellow fever and malaria, the mortality rate was just astronomical. The planters, they had actually calculated that it was more economically beneficial, it's a chilling thought, to work slaves to death and then just continuously import new ones from Africa.
Cheaper than keeping them alive.
Cheaper than investing in their long-term health or sustenance. It was a business model built on death.
Which leads to the demographic reality that really explains the omnipresent terror on the island. The population was constantly being refreshed by new captives from Africa, which kept the culture vibrant and African. But the sheer numbers, that's what terrified the white population.
Right. By 1789, you're looking at a total population of roughly 520,000 people. Of that number, about 452,000 were enslaved black Africans.
So what's the ratio there?
It's about an 8-to-1 ratio of enslaved people to the free population. And that ratio meant that the white minority, even though they had all the military power, lived in this constant, paralyzing state of fear.
They knew they were outnumbered.
Massively. As the historian Paul Fregosi put it, Saint-Domingue was a society seething with hatred, where everyone quite rightly lived in terror of everyone else. It was just a ticking clock.
And that powder keg was structured by an incredibly rigid and really vicious social caste system. Let's break down the groups who were constantly at each other's throats, even before the enslaved population rose up.
Okay, so at the very, very top, you have the Grand Blanc, the big whites. These are your wealthy, mostly French-born plantation owners. And crucially, many of them were absentee landlords.
They lived in Paris.
They preferred the safety and culture of France, right? So they left their plantations in the hands of often very cruel overseers and agents. Their entire existence was based on maximizing profit from their human property from a safe distance.
Okay, then the layer below them, the Petit Blanc.
The little whites. These were the lower class whites. So artisans, shopkeepers, and the direct supervisors on the plantations, the overseers, they deeply resented the wealth and the arrogance of the Grand Blancs, but they clung desperately to their white skin privilege.
And they were especially hostile to the third major group, right? The gens de couleur libre.
Exactly, the free people of color. By the 1780s, there were about 28,000 of them. Many were mixed race, often the children of white men and black women. And many were highly educated. They'd send their kids to France for schooling.
And they owned property.
Yeah.
Some even owned slaves themselves, ironically.
They did. They owned property, businesses. But despite all their education and wealth, they were subjected to this incredibly humiliating and restrictive legal discrimination.
Can you give us some examples of that? I mean, how did the French system make sure that even a wealthy, free person of color knew their place?
Oh, absolutely. The laws were designed to ensure they could never, ever achieve genuine equality. They were limited in where they could live, often forbidden from certain cities or neighborhoods. They could not hold public office. That was monopolized by the Grands Blancs. They were forbidden from wearing certain kinds of clothing or jewelry that might signify status, and they had to observe strict curfews. The entire colonial structure was designed to constantly remind them that no matter how much money they had, they were fundamentally inferior to the poorest white person on the island.
So that pressure, cook-rich whites versus poor whites, free people of color versus all whites, it created all these internal cracks. But the real sustained resistance wasn't coming from legal arguments. It was coming from the mountains.
That's right. This brings us to the foundation of organized resistance, maroonage and Vodou.
So define maroonage for us.
Maroonage was the active, sustained defiance of the system. These were large bands of runaway slaves who established independent communities, they were called marins, in the remote mountainous interior of the island.
So they were living free.
They were living free and they were fighting back. They would conduct these lightning raids on plantations to liberate other slaves, steal supplies, and destroy property. These bands could sometimes number in the thousands, and they were basically impossible for the French colonial militia to ever fully eradicate. They were a living symbol of a freedom that was being actively practiced, not just dreamed of.
And what provided the sort of cultural and organizational spine for these resistance efforts?
That was the role of Vodou. Vodou is a syncretic religion. It's a blend of Catholic elements with the religions and cultural practices of West Africa, Fon, Yoruba, Congo traditions mostly.
And the French feared it?
They tried ruthlessly to suppress it because they rightly understood it was a hidden, shared cultural identity that implicitly rejected the status of being enslaved. It allowed people from different parts of Africa who were constantly divided by language and origin to connect spiritually and politically. It was the secret communication network essential for planning rebellion.
And within that spiritual context, we see the rise of these almost prophetic leaders. Tell us about Francois Macandal and why his story is so important, even decades before the main revolt.
Macandal was a seminal figure, active back in the 1750s. He was a Vodou priest, a charismatic leader, and he managed to unify multiple maroon bands into a larger network.
So he's an organizer.
A brilliant organizer. His methods were often pharmacological. Sources suggest he coordinated a widespread plan to poison white masters and their livestock using local herbs and toxins. He represented this enduring hope that African traditions and knowledge could triumph over European cruelty.
But he was caught.
He was, and his execution was designed to be a spectacle. He was burned alive at the stake in 1758. But his martyrdom and the memory of his organized network, it just kept the spirit of defiance burning. The 1791 revolt didn't just spring from a vacuum, it was the direct heir to McCandless's sustained resistance.
So you have a society that is just ready to explode. It's built on pure economic greed and demographic fear, and it's sustained by this undercurrent of African spiritual resistance. Then, in 1789, the spark is lit across the ocean. The French Revolution begins, and it starts exporting ideological fire to a place that was structurally just, completely incompatible with its ideals.
That's the perfect description. It's an ideological collision. When Paris adopted the 1789 Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, declaring that men are born and remain free and equal in rights, the message was electrifying. But for the colonies, it was fatally ambiguous.
It forced every single faction in Saint-Domingue to interpret liberty through the lens of their own self-interest.
Exactly. And the interpretations were, well, deeply cynical. The Grand Blancs, the wealthy white planters, they saw the revolution as a chance for even greater freedom from France.
Wait, why would they want independence from the mother country that was protecting them?
Because they wanted complete, unregulated freedom to enforce slavery without any interference or oversight from Paris. Even the minimal French royal regulations about slave treatment, which were often ignored anyway, were too much for them. They wanted liberty for themselves to practice a maximally profitable system of bondage. They wanted to replace the king's authority with their own.
And then the gens de couleur libre, the wealthy free people of color, they saw the Declaration as their moment.
Precisely. They saw it as their chance to finally achieve full civil and political rights, the kind of rights that their wealth and education should have already given them. You see leaders like Julien Raymond, a wealthy mixed-race planter, lobbying vigorously in Paris for the Declaration to be applied to colonial subjects. They were asking for equality within the French system.
And that tension just boiled over with the short-lived but really consequential insurgency led by Vincent Auger in 1790.
Auger's revolt became a massive symbol. He was a young, educated, wealthy, free man of color. He traveled to France, argued for the rights of his people, and came home determined. When the local officials refused to grant him the voting rights he believed were legally his, he launched an armed insurgency with about 300 followers.
It was crushed.
It was swiftly and brutally suppressed by the white militia, and his execution. It was designed to be a definitive, horrifying deterrent.
Tell us about it.
It was just spectacular in its cruelty. Auger was publicly tortured. He was broken on the wheel, which is a slow, excruciating method of execution designed to shatter every bone in the body before he was finally beheaded. The colonial authorities intended this to send a clear message: no challenge to the racial hierarchy will be tolerated. But it achieved the complete opposite. Auger's martyrdom became a key moment, later cited by the enslaved rebels themselves as proof that the colonial powers were treacherous and that negotiation was impossible.
So after Auger's failure proved that the system would not reform, the enslaved population finally takes center stage. This is the true beginning of the revolution, August 1791.
This is the critical turning point. The initial conflicts between the white factions and the free people of color had destabilized the whole colonial administration. It created a perfect power vacuum, and the enslaved seized the opportunity.
And the signal for this mass revolt was given on August 14, 1791, at the Bois Caiman ceremony.
That's right.
Describe that event. It's arguably the single most important symbolic moment in the entire revolution.
It was a secret voodoo ceremony held late one stormy night in the woods outside the city of Le Cap. It was led by Duddy Bookman, who was a voodoo high priest and a Maroon leader, and Cecile Fatiman, a Mambo, a priestess.
And the setting itself was dramatic.
The sources describe heavy rain, thunder, lightning, all of which were taken as powerful, auspicious omens by the participants. The ceremony involved a solemn oath and the sacrifice of a pig, binding the thousands of representatives from the northern plantations in a unified mission to throw off their chains. It was a spiritual, political, and military mobilization all wrapped into one powerful moment.
And the moment that ceremony ended, the physical revolt began.
Yes. On the night of August 21st, 1791, the northern plantations just erupted. Thousands of enslaved people rose up, destroying the mills, setting the cane fields ablaze, and marching on the towns. The violence was immediate and extreme, fueled by decades of accumulated trauma.
This was revenge.
This was pure vengeance. They sought pillage, rape, torture, mutilation, and death, as the sources note. It was a direct, mirror image response to the system of terror they had endured for generations. The routine floggings, the amputations, the starvation, it all came rushing back out.
It's also important to note their initial political goals, right? This wasn't immediately a war for independence.
That's a vital point. Initially, the rebels fought for their freedom and for the rights they believed the French king had actually granted them, rights they thought the colonial governors were suppressing. They were fighting for abolition, not necessarily for full political sovereignty outside of France. At least, not yet.
So the scale of this rebellion was so massive that it quickly became more than just a local uprising. It became a factor in global geopolitics. By 1793, France is at war with most of Europe, especially Britain and Spain, and this just internationalizes the whole conflict in Saint-Domingue.
Exactly. Spain controlled the eastern side of the island, Santo Domingo, and Great Britain saw a golden opportunity to snatch the world's most lucrative colony. So they both invaded. The French colonial authorities were suddenly facing a massive internal rebellion and invasions from two of Europe's most powerful empires.
It's a desperate situation for the French commissioners on the ground, Sonthonax and Polverol. They need allies, and they make a game-changing strategic decision.
They do. In 1793, the French commissioners start offering freedom and French citizenship to any slave who joins a Republican army to fight against Spain and Britain.
So they weaponized emancipation.
They weaponized emancipation. And this localized political decision was quickly ratified by the National Convention back in Paris in 1794, officially abolishing slavery throughout all French colonies.
That 1794 decree is so fascinating. Was this a genuine moral conversion for the revolutionary French government, or was it just purely a pragmatic wartime measure?
I think it's a fascinating blend of the two. Pragmatically, of course, France needed soldiers. It was a desperate military strategy to harness the power of the enslaved population against its rivals. But ideologically, French revolutionaries like Georges Danton, they framed it as the ultimate realization of universal liberty.
A moral victory.
A moral triumph of the French Republic over the monarchical slave-owning systems of Britain and Spain. Danton famously declared, "We are proclaiming universal liberty. Let us launch liberty into the colonies. The English are dead today." It made France look like the moral champion of the entire age of revolutions.
And this is the moment that Toussaint Louverture, the great tactical genius of the revolution, fully steps into the international spotlight.
Toussaint Louverture is one of history's most remarkable figures. I mean, born a slave, he was self-educated, and he showed this profound aptitude for military strategy and diplomacy.
He had initially thought for the Spanish, correct?
He had, because he believed they offered the best chance for freedom. But once France officially abolished slavery in 1794, Toussaint immediately switched allegiance. He brought his disciplined army of thousands of freedmen over to the French Republican side.
And his impact was immediate. He starts driving out the Spanish and fighting the massive British expeditionary force. And the sources point out that the British were defeated less by French artillery and more by something else.
Indeed. Toussaint's forces were highly effective, but their greatest ally was yellow fever. The British, they were unfamiliar with the tropical environment, they had no natural immunity, and they were just decimated.
The black vomit, as they called it.
The black vomit. It annihilated their forces far more effectively than any army could have. The sources state the British campaign cost their treasury £4 million and resulted in the death, wounding, or disabling of approximately 100,000 men. It was a complete debacle for the British Empire.
So by 1798, Toussaint has successfully expelled all the foreign powers and restored French control, though he's ruling Saint-Domingue autonomously. He's the de facto leader. And this leads to another brutal conflict, the War of the South.
The War of the South from 1799 to 1800 was Toussaint's move to consolidate his power against his chief mulatto rival, André Rigaud. And this conflict really exposed the deep internal fissures that were inherited from the colonial era.
So this was the old tension between the black majority and the mulatto elite flaring up into a civil war.
That's exactly what it was. Rigaud led the gens de couleur libre, who felt they deserved leadership because of their property, education, and their status under the old French system. Toussaint represented the black majority who had achieved freedom through force of arms.
And Toussaint won.
He crushed Rigaud brutally, establishing himself as the undisputed master of the entire French portion of Hispaniola. He followed this up with the 1801 Constitution, which made him governor for life and formally extended abolition to the Spanish side of the island. He was building a de facto independent state, all under the nominal banner of France.
And that, of course, was completely intolerable to Napoleon Bonaparte, who had just seized power in France.
Napoleon's pride and his massive economic ambition could not abide a black former slave ruling France's most profitable territory. So in 1802, he sent the largest expeditionary force France had ever dispatched overseas, about 30,000 men led by his own brother-in-law, General Charles Leclerc.
Leclerc had secret orders, didn't he?
He did. Secret orders to first capture Toussaint and second, restore slavery.
Leclerc achieved the first goal. He captured Toussaint in a betrayal, shipped him off to a freezing prison in the Jura Mountains of France, where Toussaint later died in 1803. But that second goal, restoring slavery, that proved fatal for the French.
That was the critical misstep. The attempt to reimpose slavery convinced all the Haitian generals, now led by Jean-Jacques Dessalines, that the French could never be trusted. They realized that total, uncompromising independence was the only path to survival. The war transformed from a fight for freedom within the French system to a total war for sovereign existence.
And Dessalines adopted a merciless strategy known as scorched earth.
He was utterly pragmatic and ruthless. Dessalines ordered his troops to burn everything, every plantation, every mill, every storage house, every piece of infrastructure that could provide any sustenance to the invading French army. He famously declared, "Bear in mind that the soil bathed with our sweat must not furnish our enemies with the smallest sustenance."
So the French arrived to find a ruin, not a colony to be reclaimed.
A complete ruin. And then, once again, yellow fever returned with the rainy season and delivered its decisive blow.
The disease just decimated the French ranks.
It did. Leclerc, who had initially written so optimistically to Napoleon, quickly saw his army collapse. By the end of 1802, he was complaining he had only 8,000 fit men left. Leclerc himself died from yellow fever in November of 1802, a staggering loss for Napoleon.
Leclerc's successor, a man named Vicomte de Rochambeau, responded to this military failure with a campaign of, genocidal horror.
Rochambeau resorted to desperate, barbaric measures. He was trying to use terror to break the Haitian will. He imported thousands of large attack dogs from Cuba, trained specifically to savage black and mulatto people. He ordered mass drownings, loading hundreds of captured black soldiers onto barges and sinking them in the harbor. This genocidal campaign, it just cemented the Haitian resolve for the total eradication of the French presence. There was no going back.
And Dessalines answered this with equal brutality. It became a pure war of vengeance, no quarter given. And this is also where we see the interesting story about the Polish legions.
Yes, it's a fascinating detail. Napoleon had sent several Polish legions who were fighting for France with the promise of French aid for their own independence from Russia. When these Polish soldiers got to Haiti and realized they were being forced to fight to reimpose slavery on a people who had just won their liberty, many of them defected.
They saw the hypocrisy.
They saw the hypocrisy and found common cause with the Haitians. They abandoned Rochambeau's forces. It's a small but significant detail that shows even European soldiers understood the moral bankruptcy of what France was doing.
The end finally came in 1803. War between France and Britain renewed, which meant the Royal Navy established a crucial blockade.
And that sealed it. Cut off from supply and reinforcement, Rochambeau was doomed. Trapped by Dessalines on land and blockaded by the British at sea, he was finally defeated in the last major battle at Vertières in November 1803. He was forced to surrender. The most powerful army in Europe, led by the greatest conqueror of the era, had been comprehensively defeated by an army of former slaves.
So, with the French gone, Dessalines declares the nation independent on January 1st, 1804. He renames it Haiti, restoring the indigenous Arawak name meaning land of mountains. It's a victory for the ages, the world's first free black republic. But that victory was immediately stained by an act of horrific vengeance, the 1804 massacre.
Yes, this was the systematic killing of the remaining French white population, estimated to be between 3,000 and 5,000 individuals, ordered directly by Dessalines in the early months of 1804.
Why? What was the political calculation there?
Well, historians argue it was a highly political move designed for two main goals. First, complete vengeance for the genocidal campaign of Leclerc and Rochambeau, and second, to send an uncompromising message to the world, and especially to France, that any attempt to re-enslave the population would be met with total war and the total eradication of any French presence.
But it wasn't indiscriminate, was it? There were specific groups who were exempted.
And that's what reinforces the political nature of the act. Dessalines explicitly ordered the protection of German and Polish settlers who had defected to the Haitian cause. He also protected French doctors, certain professionals, and French widows who pledged allegiance to the new state. The target wasn't just white people, it was the colonist, the slaveholder, the threat of a fifth column.
The new government then immediately faces this immense challenge of defining its own identity, which is reflected in the 1805 Constitution.
That constitution was radical in its rejection of the past. Crucially, it decreed that all Haitian citizens were legally black.
What did that mean?
It wasn't a biological definition, it was a political category. It was an explicit rejection of the entire colonial racial hierarchy, all the divisions between mulatto and black that the French had exploited. It created a single, unified legal identity founded on the struggle for liberty.
And it also banned white land ownership.
It did. It permanently prohibited white foreigners from owning land in Haiti. This was a crucial measure to ensure that the plantation system, and thus foreign economic control, could never be reestablished.
But the new nation had to remain constantly ready for war. We see this immediate militarization of the state.
Oh, absolutely. The fear of a French return was existential and completely justified. Napoleon was constantly plotting a reconquest. As a result, Haiti maintained a massive, disproportionate army. Nearly 10% of all able-bodied men were in active service.
And that's a huge burden.
A huge military burden that, while necessary for survival, diverted precious resources and contributed significantly to Haiti's political instability for generations. The state was born militarized.
Alongside militarization, you have the problem of the economy. The plantations are destroyed, production has stopped, and the population fought a revolution to be free from forced labor. So how did Dessalines try to rebuild the agricultural wealth?
Dessalines, who briefly declared himself Emperor Jacques I, he instituted a very strict, highly controlled labor system. He understood wealth came from agriculture, and he was determined to restart production of sugar and coffee.
So what did this system look like?
He abolished the whip, that ultimate symbol of slavery, but he instituted forced labor regulations. It essentially bound laborers to plantations in a system that a lot of critics liken to serfdom.
That's a profound paradox, isn't it? They fight a revolution for freedom, and then they're forced back onto the land. Even without the whip, how different was that from the system they'd fought to defeat?
That is the crucial, painful question that divided the new nation. Dessalines argued it was necessary for national survival. And to be fair, workers did receive a share of the profits, and they were legally citizens, not property. But the system was enforced with military efficiency, and many overseers simply replaced the whip with other tools, like thick vines, to enforce the labor quotas.
So this compromise, or this betrayal, depending on how you see it, caused a lot of resentment.
Widespread resentment among the rural population who felt their freedom was being curtailed by a new ruling elite. And this discontent eventually contributed to Dessalines' assassination in 1806.
And his assassination leads to the formal division of the country, which highlights these persistent internal inequalities.
Yes. After he's killed, Haiti splits into two separate nations. You get the Republic of Haiti in the south, led by Alexandre Pétion, who was a mulatto general, and you get the Kingdom of Haiti in the north, led by Henry Christophe, a black general who later crowned himself King Henry I.
And they had different approaches to governance.
Very different. Pétion, in the south, focused on land distribution, granting small plots to the peasantry, which was popular but economically inefficient. Christophe, in the north, focused on centralized, forced labor to rebuild major infrastructure, like his massive fortress, the Citadelle La Ferrière, and he tried to maintain wealth through military discipline. This split just showed that the old black versus mulatto tensions rooted in the colonial caste system were far from resolved.
But the greatest, most devastating long-term challenge to the new nation wasn't internal division or the threat of invasion. It was the economic punishment inflicted by the European powers, specifically France's infamous independence debt of 1825.
This is perhaps the most egregious act of economic warfare in modern history, and its consequences persist to this day. In 1825, France, under King Charles X, sent a fleet of 14 heavily armed warships to Haiti's coast. They delivered an ultimatum.
What was the ultimatum?
Pay an indemnity of 150 million gold francs, or face military invasion and the reestablishment of slavery.
150 million gold francs. To put that in context, how massive was that sum?
It was staggering. It was roughly 10 times Haiti's annual revenue at the time. It was equivalent to about 80% of France's entire annual budget. It was an impossible sum.
And what was the payment for?
This is the most obscene part. The payment was explicitly demanded as compensation to former French slaveholders for their loss of property.
They were paying for themselves.
They were being forced to pay their former masters for the right to be free. It wasn't payment for damage, it was a ransom for recognition.
They had to accept it.
To avoid the threatened invasion, Haiti was forced to accept the debt, and immediately they were forced to take out crippling loans from French banks, the very institutions demanding the payment. This debt instantly bankrupted the nation. It diverted vast resources away from education, infrastructure, healthcare, everything.
It was economic strangulation from birth.
It was a multi-generational catastrophe. The debt was later reduced to 90 million francs in 1838, but the interest rates and subsequent loans kept the economy in a death spiral. Haiti did not finish paying off this independence debt and its associated loans until 1947.
1947.
For 122 years, the nation was literally paying its former masters for its own freedom. It is impossible to analyze Haiti's subsequent history without understanding this foundational, crippling act of colonial injustice.
Given the scale of the victory and the subsequent punishment, it's not surprising that historians and commentators have struggled to properly categorize this event. This brings us to the historiographical debates, particularly the concept of silencing the past.
That term comes from the historian Michel Rolfe-Trio. He argues that the Haitian Revolution presented such a fundamental, radical challenge to the master narratives of Western power, race, and modernity that it was institutionally rendered unthinkable. And so it was marginalized in mainstream history.
Why unthinkable? Because it proved that the enslaved could organize, defeat European armies, and govern themselves, which completely undermined the colonial justification of white superiority.
That's it exactly. It broke the ideological frame. If you were an American or European thinker who believed in the simultaneous progress of Enlightenment liberty and the necessity of racial slavery, how could you possibly integrate the successful, self-emancipated Black Republic of Haiti into your worldview?
You couldn't.
You couldn't. So you had to systematically silence it, either by just omitting it from the history books or, more commonly, by demonizing it.
And that demonization campaign took the form of what historians call the Haitian Gothic.
The hegemonic Haitian Gothic was a concerted rhetorical strategy used by pro-slavery writers in Europe and the Americas, especially in the American South. They weaponized tropes of horror, savagery, and anarchy to depict the revolution. The goal was to prove that emancipation led inevitably to social collapse and barbarism, a powerful warning used to justify continuing slavery everywhere else.
And there's one really common, horrifying example of this propaganda trope.
The most widespread and enduring one was the apocryphal story of the impaled infant. Narratives circulated wildly that the rebels were so monstrous that they carried the impaled body of a white infant on a pike as a standard or a banner. Whether it was true or not is almost irrelevant. It was designed to evoke maximum horror and justify the view of the Haitians as monsters thirsting after blood.
And it masked the reality of the slavery the French themselves practiced.
Completely. They also peddled the fantasy of reverse slavery, with stories claiming that Black soldiers forced white women to toil chained in the fields, driven by whips. The outrage wasn't about the injustice of forced labor itself, but about the racial reversal of who was inflicting the suffering.
But the Haitians fought back against this narrative, creating what we now call the radical counter-Gothic.
This is where Haitian intellectual history really shines. Leaders like Dessalines and later writers like the Baron de Vaste, they aggressively inverted these tropes. They used the same language of horror to declare the French the true cannibals.
How so?
They pointed out the sadistic torture, the systematic rape, and the mass murder that were just endemic to the plantation system. They reframed the colonial system as the original genocidal horror regime built on vampiric, life-sucking economic practices. By defining the French as the true monsters, they asserted their own violence as a necessary moral act of self-defense.
A moral triumph. And this defense found its way into the intellectual mainstream decades later, notably through the words of Frederick Douglass.
Frederick Douglass, speaking in 1893, became one of Haiti's most fervent international champions. He famously defended Haiti, arguing that its freedom was not bestowed as a gift by white benevolence, but was something conquered as a right. He celebrated Haiti as a beacon of Black excellence and revolutionary defiance.
And the global consequences of this victory were just immense, starting right next door in North America.
Napoleon's catastrophic defeat in Haiti, the loss of Toussaint, of Leclerc, of 40,000 troops. It led him to completely abandon his entire vision for a French-American empire. He realized he couldn't possibly defend or supply any territory in the Americas without a solid base in Haiti.
And that failure directly led to one of the most consequential land deals in U.S. history.
It did. Napoleon's immediate need for cash and the realization that his American dreams were finished prompted him to sell the massive Louisiana Territory to the United States in 1803,
The Louisiana Purchase.
which had the tragic unintended consequence of massively expanding the plantation system and slavery in the American South, all ironically thanks to the victory of the Haitian enslaved.
Haiti's influence wasn't just geopolitical, though. It was a powerful symbol for enslaved people across the entire hemisphere.
It was undeniable proof of concept. The victory inspired numerous revolts, like the 1811 German Coast Uprising in Louisiana and the Aponte Rebellion in Cuba. Haiti was a tangible possibility of freedom, a symbol of hope.
And the new republic even offered concrete aid to other revolutionaries, most notably Simón Bolívar.
When Bolívar was in desperate exile in 1815, seeking to liberate Gran Colombia from Spain, he found refuge and aid in Haiti from President Alexandre Pétion.
What was the deal?
Pétion provided him with troops, arms, and ammunition, but on one explicit condition: that Bolívar, upon achieving victory, would immediately abolish slavery in every territory he liberated. Bolívar kept his promise, and he publicly acknowledged his debt to Haiti for the successful liberation of South America.
And yet, despite all of this, the U.S. government, terrified of inspiring its own enslaved population, refused to recognize Haiti diplomatically for decades.
It's a perfect reflection of the hypocrisy Trujillo described. Thomas Jefferson, a slaveholder and sitting president, openly feared the implications of a successful Black republic. The U.S. refused diplomatic recognition until 1862, right in the middle of the American Civil War. The power structure of the U.S., built on slavery, could not morally or politically afford to legitimize Haiti.
So when we look back at the Haitian Revolution, we see a story of just unparalleled resistance and victory. It was the moment that the universal ideals of the Age of Revolutions were finally, violently applied to the very people they were specifically intended to exclude.
They defeated the armies of Spain, Britain, and Napoleonic France, all while battling disease and internal strife. They achieved the impossible, total, uncompromising self-emancipation. But that victory came at a staggering continuous cost, institutionalized through that independence debt that defined their economic reality for over a century. They were punished for their success.
The attempts to silence this history, to reduce it to these tropes of horror, it just demonstrates how fundamental Haiti's challenge was to the entire global structure of power and race. It shifted the moral calculus of liberty and exposed the failure of the white Atlantic world to live up to its own highest ideals.
Which leaves us with this provocative thought for you to consider. The Haitian Revolution definitively proved that freedom must be conquered as a right. If the international community, the supposed champions of universal liberty, then cripples that free nation with debt, not for damages, but as compensation to former slaveholders for their lost property, what does that imply about the sincerity of global commitments to liberty? The ultimate question is not just how Haiti won, but why the world made them pay for winning for 122 years.
We urge you to continue exploring this pivotal, essential moment in world history. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.